Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are covering the next deity in our Deity Build series, Helm. Helm is the Flavouring god of guardians and protectors, and is usually worshipped by both guards and paladins. He is also known as the Vigilant One and the Watcher, and is basically kind of seen as this calculated, somewhat cold and distant deity, but who is extremely focused and always takes the role of a defender, and sometimes even an enforcer, so very much like a guard or a paladin. He's kind of known for being this absolutely hulking figure who always hides his true, kind of visage behind his helm. So you can kind of see what I was going for with the character design today. Probably one of my favorite designs. I think it's one of the only character designs on the channel where I've actually purposefully hid the head, as I never ever do that. But long story short, what we're going to be trying to make with this build is kind of a tank, mainly focused on skills that allow us to protect others, as well as kind of, being able to deal massive damage back to those who would do evil. Now, there are actually a few different routes you can kind of take with this build. I've kind of gone for the more defensive, protective variant, because I definitely think that would be kind of what this build is about. However, I would say that there is definitely a great Weapon Master variant here, which sacrifices a bit of its AC and protective utility for massive damage. And you kind of have a choice of the different ways you want to go about this, as well as even being able to choose different subclasses with our multi-classing as we go. So be sure to kind of stick around for the kind of full video to know the kind of different ways you can build this. Also, you will be seeing the combat footage on screen now, and I do want to point out that, yes, the damage on this build is low in the combat footage, and that is because I deliberately nerfed myself to using a weapon that you get within the first 5 minutes of the game, because Helm's weapon in this game is a very, very early game spear. But I do have an upgraded version, which, thanks to Captain Kirk over on the Discord, has a pretty interesting flavouring to it of how you can get a better version of that weapon later on. So I really, really hope you guys enjoy that part of the build as well. And without further ado, let's get into it. You actually have a choice here. You can either start as a paladin or a fighter. I'm personally going to be going with paladin because I feel like I want more of the paladin features before the fighter features first, but either will work. Just make sure you're getting that weapon and armor proficiency from either or. So we're going to be kicking things off as a paladin. I am playing as a half orc today, but honestly it can be whatever you like. It really doesn't matter. I just quite like the idea of using half orc because they are a big and burly race, and they get a bunch of features that work out quite nicely with this build, including dark vision, relentless endurance to be able to get back up with 1 hit point after being downed, which feels very on theme for a vigilant protector, as well as savage attacks allowing us to deal more damage on a critical hit, which is always nice. I felt like it fit quite nicely for this build, but you can choose whatever race you like. It actually isn't going to affect this build at the end of the day. As I said, we're starting with Paladin, giving us access to Channel Oath and Lay on Hands, which is always nice. And our subclass, again, it doesn't actually matter what subclass you want to pick for your Paladin here. Oath of the Ancients, Oath of Vengeance, and Oath of Devotion all will kind of work for this build. I am personally going with Oath of Devotion, although I can see why Oath of Vengeance might make more sense lore-wise, if you kind of think of it a certain way, but I quite like Devotion here as it is going to get us some tricks that we can have up our sleeve, which are going to feel great to use later, including Holy Rebuke, allowing you to grant an ally a vengeful aura that deals 1 to 4 radiant damage to anyone who hits them with a melee attack. Feels very on theme for a protector and kind of divine retributioner, I suppose. The background I went for is Acolyte, giving us insight and religion, and as such our ability scores are going to be as follows. We have strength at 16, it is going to be our main attacking stat. Dexterity is at 10, a little bit on the lower side. Dex, don't you dare. But this is going to be set at 10 because we are mainly wearing heavy armor, and so we don't really need our dexterity with this build. So I felt like just having it at 10 is fine. It does mean our initiative rolls are going to kind of suck, but hey, we kind of had to lose some points somewhere. Constitution is next. We do want to have a decent hit point pool for being able to take those hits. Intelligence is at 8, we don't need it. Wisdom is at 10 because, I don't know, you can kind of mess this around if you want to maybe take these points out of here and put them into Dexterity to get that slightly better initiative buff. It's entirely up to you, but I like it so our Wisdom saves aren't in the negatives. And Charisma is at 14. We don't really focus so much on our Paladin spells in this build, so I feel like 14 is a decent modifier to have. As for our ability scores, there's not really much else to select between the fact that we started off as a paladin, got intimidation from half-orc, and took the acolyte background. The only 3 skills left to us are athletics, persuasion, and medicine. And I'm certainly not taking medicine, so athletics and persuasion it is. Next up, we are going to take our usual 1-level dip that we always take with these deity builds into Cleric. Cleric is going to allow you to select a deity and therefore gain dialogue and roleplay options related to that deity. So by picking Helm, we get access to a few new dialogue options and maybe a unique cutscene here or two. It usually depends on the deity. Helm, the Watcher, is an eternal sentry among the gods, representing guardians from across the planes. After more than a century of fading worship, Helm's power was restored with the second Sundering. So yeah, he actually fell out of favour for a while, but then kind of made a comeback, so, you know, good for him. You know, it's always nice to see someone kind of rise up from the ashes, as it were. Next up, for cantrips, again, our wisdom is abysmal here, so we're not exactly going to be getting offensive cantrips or anything like that, so we're going to pick up the usual utility kit of resistance, guidance, and thaumaturgy, as always. As for our subclass, we are going to go with Light Domain. One of Helm's domains is light, and as such, we are going to make use of that here. I can see War Domain being useful. Again, those bonus action attacks would be nice, but we're going to be getting bonus action attacks anyway with this build without the need of a resource like that, so we might as well pick up something that I think will personally be more useful for us in the long run, and that is Light Domain. Light Domain is going to give us a few things that we're not too worried about, but we do quite like the level 1 subclass feature, Warding Flare. Warding Flare is going to allow us to spend our reaction to impose disadvantage on an attacker who attacks us, allowing us to be a much more effective tank. This build is going to be a little bit reaction heavy, but we can work around that as we go. Next up for our spells. Now, obviously, the main kind of utility option we can go for here is Sanctuary. But since I chose Oath of Devotion Paladin, we actually do get Sanctuary from that subclass anyway, so we don't need to grab it here. But if you're playing Ancients or Vengeance, you might want to pick this up. It is slightly counterintuitive to the whole idea of us, kind of, you know, taking attacks for other people, because then we make it so we can't be hit. But again, as a tank, there are going to be times where our HP gets low, so being able to cast Sanctuary on ourselves so we can get healed back up without having to worry is quite nice. Also, we will be able to synergize Sanctuary with some features. Basically, for example, we'll be able to make it so that enemies have disadvantage to hit anyone but us, but then of course if we throw up Sanctuary as a bonus action after doing that, they can't hit us, so they have disadvantage to attack everyone around us, which is actually a very efficient form of tanking in a weird way. It does make sense, but anyways, if you're not playing Oath of Devotion, pick up Sanctuary here. If you are, that's where it gets a little bit trickier, because a lot of these spells we're going to be getting from Paladin anyway as utility options, so the only thing I can kind of think of that we don't get from Paladin would be Create or Destroy Water, which, hey, you never know when that could be useful, especially if you decide to have a lightning caster in your party, so you can go with that. But of course, Sanctuary would be the primary option if you're not going Oath of Devotion. Next up, we're going to go back to Cleric for level 2, meaning that we're going to get a bunch of things: Divine Smite, some spells, and a fighting style. Now, for our fighting style, it depends on what kind of style of play you want to go with. Again, I'm going for more of a defender role, using a shield and a spear, kind of like a hoplite. So if you're going for the more kind of protection-based fighting style with the spear in one hand, then I obviously recommend dueling. Dueling is going to allow you to add an additional 2 damage with weapons that you are not wielding in 2 hands, so it works out quite nicely for us as a little bit of a damage buff. Now, as well, we also do gain access to prepared spells, and I mainly want to pick up utility options here, as again, our charisma is not the highest, so the smite spells might not work out so well. Bless, Heroism, Divine Favour, and Shield of Faith are all great spells for this playstyle. Basically, these 4 spells are going to work great for us as kind of utility options to be able to bolster up ourselves or our allies. Bless is Bless, it gives a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws for ourselves and our allies. Heroism allows us to gain temporary hit points each turn and be immune to being frightened. Divine Favour gives us an additional 1 to 4 radiant damage on our attacks, and Shield of Faith increases our armor class by 2. A nice thing about all of these spells is while they are all concentration, we aren't really too concentration heavy, so basically pick the spell that works in the moment, and we do have some equipment that might synergize with this later as well, which is nice, so we can move on from here. Next up, at Paladin level 3, we are going to get access to Sanctuary, like I said, as well as Sacred Weapon, allowing us to make our weapon glow with a bright light for 10 turns, and also adding our charisma modifier to attack rolls. Not damage, just attack rolls, just for giving our attacks a higher chance to hit for 10 turns. It's basically just a flavor spell for us here. Otherwise, in the Great Weapon Master variant, it might be a bit more useful to help offset the penalty. We also get Turn the Unholy, basically allowing us to turn undead and fiends, kind of like a cleric, which is nice. We also do gain access to an extra spell, and I guess a healing spell like Cure Wounds does actually make sense for a build like this. Next up, at Paladin, level 4, we are going to get access to our first feat. Basically, you can kind of pick whatever you like for this. I mean, I would start with an ability score improvement before maybe getting any of our more special feats, and bump up that strength to be able to get a bit more accuracy with our attacks. Again, though, you could, if you really wanted to, you could pick up maybe some buffs like the Potion of Everlasting Vigor if you really wanted to maximize this build. And then you could pick up another one of the kind of main feats a bit earlier, but we'll just stick with an ability score improvement for now. Next up, at Paladin, level 5, we are going to get access to extra attack, as well as level 2 spells. Now, as for a level 2 spell, what I would kind of pick here is Magic Weapon is a great concentration spell that is going to buff up the attack and damage rolls of any weapon we like, and it's just a concentration spell that we can kind of just cast and forget that will still synergize with some features that we're going to be getting later on. And as for another spell, that you can kind of pick up whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. Protection from Poison would give you resistance to poison, so if you wanted to go for that, you could, but I don't really want to use too much of our level 2 spell slots if we can. We are a bit limited with this build and we want to be able to use them for smites, but it's an option there if you so choose. Now, we're not going to be going to Paladin level 6. I mean, you could if you wanted to, as it does make sense to get Aura of Protection on a literal protector, but there are some other things that I would like to get from our other multi-class, and you already know what it is. We are going with Fighter. Fighter is going to give us access to a bunch of things, Second Wind for a bit of healing, and another fighting style. Since I'm playing the more Defender Protector variant, you can either go with Defense, giving you an extra bonus to your AC, or Protection, allowing you to, while you have a shield equipped, impose disadvantage on an attack against your allies while you were within 1.5 meters, and you must be able to see the attacker. So it would allow you to actually protect your allies, but I do find this one to be a bit too situational, and we do have other features that are going to make it so enemies are forced to attack us, so Defense would make sense here, just to give us a bit more armor class. So that's what I'm going to go with. It's a bit more generally useful, but Protection would definitely be probably more on theme, but I'm also trying to make a decent build here. Fighter level 2 gives us Action Surge. You already know what that does. Now, Fighter level 3, you do actually have a choice. Now, I am obviously going to be going with Battle Master, which has kind of been alluded to throughout this video. Battle Master is going to give us a bunch of things. Our maneuvers, which are going to make us better at protecting and dealing damage at the same time. It felt really on theme to be able to get Battle Master with this build, to be able to get things like Goading Attack and such like that, which I'll get into in a minute. However, there is definitely an argument to be made for Eldritch Knight, and a pretty good one at that. Even though we dumped our intelligence, Eldritch Knight does have a ton of useful utility cantrips and spells. Mage Hand and Minor Illusion could be interesting, or even Friends if you wanted to capitalize a bit more on your charisma. Spells, obviously Shield would be huge, as well as being able to pick up, Magic Missile, which never misses anyway. And you could even grab something useful from the expanded spell list like Longstrider, Enhanced Leap, Disguise Self, Featherfall, Find Familiar, Grease. There's a ton of different things you could pick up here that would actually be beneficial to this build, as well as being able to get more spell slots, even though they will still be slightly limited. My only issue with this is, again, I kind of like the Battle Master features more for this build. I do have ways of making it so that we still have a decent chunk of spell slots, so we're not going to feel completely helpless, and as well as the fact that the maneuvers uses separate resource and spell slots, so we won't be taking up all of our smites with things like shield. It's entirely up to you what you want to go for here. The other thing Eldritch Knight would give you would be weapon bond, and since we are using a spear, you could throw the spear and have it come back to you, so it's entirely up to you. I will mention though, as an aside though, that this build doesn't rely on you having a spear. As you can see with the statue of Helm in the background, he is depicted with a greatsword, so you can go with that instead if you like, but since there was a spear from Helm in the game, I wanted to kind of focus on making almost like a hoplite style build, so that's what I've gone with here. So either Eldritch Knight or Battle Master will work. I mean, Champion obviously can work, just a bit boring, so I'm personally going to be going with Battle Master. Battle Master is going to give us access to these maneuvers, as I said, and our main one is going to be Goading Attack. allowing us to do additional damage and also make it so the target receives disadvantage on attacking any other creature, allowing us to protect our allies that way. I also really like Disarming Strike, allowing us to force an enemy to drop their weapon, meaning they have to spend an action to pick it up again and equip it, meaning that we create opportunities for people to escape or get away. And finally, Trip Attack, because it is just the best one, allowing you to knock an enemy on the floor, making them prone, meaning that all subsequent attacks against them have advantage when it comes to either you or your allies. So I think this works out as a really nice core. Unfortunately, these are the only maneuvers we're going to be getting, unless you decide you want to take Martial Adept as a feat. So overall, I mean, I think this is a pretty solid kit, and we still do have 4 superiority die at this level, which all recover on a short rest, so that works out quite nicely for us. And that's another thing, the resource management side of things worked out a bit better in this build, whereas if you went with Eldritch Knight, you'd only get those spell slots back on a long rest, whereas with these, you have the spell slots for a long rest, but also the maneuvers for a short rest, so you're not as long rest dependent to get the most out of this build. Next up at level 4 of Fighter, we are going to get our usual standard feat, and let's pick up the first of our kind of main feats, and I would say Polearm Master is something we absolutely want to go for here. We're using a spear, we might as well. When attacking with a glaive, halberd, quarterstaff, or spear, or pike, it's not mentioned here, but pikes also work. You can use a bonus action to attack with the butt of your weapon, so we're always going to be getting bonus action attacks regardless, which is why not getting War Priest doesn't matter as much. You can also make an opportunity attack when a target comes within range, again allowing us to use our reaction to kind of be able to be a bit more offensive or defensive if you decide to use it for warding flare. So yeah, overall it's a really nice skill to have. Obviously, combining this with Great Weapon Master if you're doing the two-handed variant is pretty broken, so feel free to do that if you like, but I already did a build like that in my all-fighter build, so in my all-fighter full party build, so feel free to check that out if you want a more offensive option of this build. But yeah, I quite like Polearm Master here, I think it works out quite nicely, so we're going to grab it. We do get extra attack at fighter level 5, but it doesn't stack, so whoops. And finally, at fighter level 6, we do get our extra feat, and you can either put this into an ability score improvement, maybe bumping up your strength or your constitution. You can put this into Great Weapon Master, like I said, if you wanted to go down that hyper offense route. You could also grab Shield Master, allowing you to gain a +2 bonus to dex saving throws while wielding a shield, and if a spell forces you to make a dexterity save, you can use a reaction to shield yourself and diminish the effect's damage, making a failed saving throw deal half, and on a successful saving throw you don't take any. Basically, it's like Rogue's evasion, I think, except in feat form, and you have to be using a shield, which is worse? I don't know, they kind of do different things while still doing the same thing. You could grab Tough if you want more HP, there's a Martial Adept, like I said, if you want some more maneuvers and an extra superiority die to use them with. There's a ton of different options you could go for here, it's entirely up to you what you want to go with. I'm probably going to go just for an ability score improvement to max out our strength. And yeah, that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is an extremely tanky character. High AC, a lot of ways to make it so the enemies are forced to go after you, a ton of ways to deal damage back with Divine Smite and the maneuvers, a ton of useful utility options to help buff up yourself or the party. You're going to be getting a little bit of everything here. Yes, this isn't exactly an optimal Paladin build, but we are going to be coming out of this with 5 level 1 spell slots and 3 level 2 spell slots, which I'll get to how that works out in a minute. And overall, this build is really strong. I mean, you will have seen the combat footage, we were still kind of shredding. We are a Paladin at the end of the day overall. We're just not the absolutely crazy Soullock Paladin or something like that. We're something a bit more tempered, but that can still fill a really important role within the group. So, let's get into the equipment and see exactly how we fulfill that role. So, lots of things to talk about here, namely, let's get the kind of main attraction out of the way first, the Watcher's Guide, Helm's Spear. Time has dampened this spear's sheen, but the center glows a faint blue. The magic it exudes feels old, terrible, and divine. The spear was given to its previous owner for his unerring loyalty, even after death. So, Helm is the Watcher, this is literally his spear. And for those of you that don't know, you actually pick this up at the very start of the game in Withers' tomb. It's one of the first weapons as a piece of loot you can come across. And as such, it's not so great. It doesn't have any weapon enchantments. It is a +0 weapon, but it does come with the unique ability to, when the spear misses a target, the wielder's next attack roll against the target gains True Strike. It gives you True Strike, so it goes from being the worst weapon in the game to the best, or somehow even worse. Whichever joke is funnier. So it's not great, but it does work as a starting weapon, and again, it's perfectly on theme for the lore. But of course, and again, I did use this for the combat footage, so even though we did have a couple of close calls, you can definitely see that with the strategy we have laid out, even a spear as weak as this can still be quite effective even in the late game, so if you're really dedicated to the bit, you can make this one work. However, again, I got to give credit to Captain Kirk for this, who over on the live stream, if you don't know Kirk, he's an active member of the community and just an overall awesome dude, and also very experienced in Dungeons & Dragons. He basically came up with an interesting bit of flavouring for how we can justify upgrading the Watcher's Guide to the Spear of Selûne Spear of Night. Now, this may be like, why are we using another deity's weapon on this deity build? Well, first of all, as a good aligned character, it's the best spear in the game that we can get. Second of all, it's not exactly uncommon, and this is what Kirk came up with. It's not exactly uncommon for good aligned deities, or hell, even evil aligned deities, to unite and collaborate for a specific cause. And I feel like a chosen of Helm who saves the Night Song helps Shadowheart find her true path in life, and you know, is trying to save Faerun from the Elder Brain, it wouldn't exactly surprise me if Selûne was willing to gift her boon to Helm's Chosen, straight up upgrading the Watcher's Guide, keeping it as the same spear, into Selûne Spear of Night. Of course, mechanically, they are two different items in the game, but it's literally a Dungeons & Dragons game. We're role-playing here, god damn it. So Selûne giving her blessing in order to help Helm fulfill his goals of protecting Faerun. I think it makes total sense to grab Selûne's Spear of Night, giving us a +3 legendary spear, which has advantage on wisdom saving throws and perception checks, gives us dark vision, although we already have it, as well as giving us 2 awesome spells. Moonbeam, making it so we can use, well, Moonbeam, allowing us to do 3d10 radiant damage, calling down a beam of light that damages any creature that touches it, and we can use an action to move that beam around. Another concentration spell that we can use, which is nice. We also gain Moon Mote, illuminating the area around us with wisps of moonish light that make movement difficult for enemies and bolster your allies' damage. At the start of your turn, each hostile creature within the light must succeed a wisdom saving throw, or they must treat the lighted area as difficult terrain, and each ally within the light deals an additional d4 of radiant damage on their hits with melee attacks. Overall, it's just a really awesome, badass looking weapon that I think, with the justifications that we have, has some brilliant lore behind it. A unification between Helm and Selûne for the greater good just feels great, especially since Selûne is right over there. They share the same apartment. It's easier on the rent. Anyways, I think that makes perfect sense. So once again, I've credited him like 3 times already, but thank you to Captain Kirk for coming up with that justification to not be using a +0 weapon for the whole game. I'm also pairing this up with the Shield of Devotion, giving us an extra level 1 spell slot, which is great, and the ability to use Aid as well to give us a little bit of extra hit points for a little bit of extra tanking. Next up, let's get into the actual equipment. First up, the Steel Watcher Helmet. I wanted a helm that completely covered our face and was still really, really useful, and the Steel Watcher Helmet is just that. Advantage on Constitution saving throw checks, meaning that our concentration is going to be much better, as well as being unable to be blinded. So technically, you could do darkness shenanigans if you've got a Warlock or something in your party, which I think works quite nicely. In fact, actually, if you've got Shadowheart in the party and she's a Trickery Cleric, you could do darkness shenanigans with that, I think. Perhaps I'm wrong. If Trickery Cleric does not get the darkness spell on their spell list, that is actually stupid. They really should. God, that subclass is not good. Anyways, back to let's stop the Trickery Cleric slander. Let's get back to the Steel Watcher Helmet. Like I say, enable some fun team strategies if you decide to go with that. And again, looks badass as hell. This whole armor set is colored in Harlequin black and white, and I think it just comes together really, really nicely. It kind of reminds me of Helm's image on the Forgotten Realms wiki, which I kind of described as he's just a Dark Souls character, which I can kind of see with this armor set, so I'm quite happy with how this came out looks-wise. Next up, the Mantle of the Holy Warrior as our cloak, allowing us to cast Crusader's Mantle once per short rest, which allows all of our allies to deal an additional bit of radiant damage on their attacks, a bit similar to the Moonmote feature we already get from our weapon. This is mainly just here for flavour. It just felt right for a build like this to have. You can slap whatever you like on here. Next up, we have the Plate Armour +2. Oh, sorry, I'm all over the place. An earlier game option, other than the Steel Watcher helmet, because this is obviously an Act 3, would be the Flawed Helldusk helmet, allowing the wielder to have a +2 bonus to saving throws against spells and a bonus to their Constitution saves. It just looks decent enough, and you can kind of see the face now. But again, I would absolutely upgrade to the Steel Watcher helm when you get the chance. Anyways, back to the main armor. We have the Plate Armour +2, a first for the channel. Never showcased this one before. I mainly wanted it for its looks. It comes with 20 AC by default, which is nice anyway, as well as it gives us a bit of damage resistance against slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning attacks, which is nice. But it's just a very, very basic armor that is just good. I mainly wanted it for the looks, because it's a unique look that I've not really shown off on the channel before, and again, I just wanted to make a big, bulky guy, so the armor worked out quite nicely for that. But an earlier option that you may want to stick with, depending on its ability, if its ability is kind of worth it to you, is the Oath of Devotion. Obtainable earlier on in the game. Comes with 18 armor class and the ability to use Eternal Devotion, giving you a second channel of charge once per long rest. Next up, we have the Legacy of the Masters, giving us a +2 to attack and damage rolls with weapons, and also a bonus to our strength saving throws. This is just here to give us more damage, because who doesn't like more damage at the end of the day? You can also throw on, I believe it's also called, what's the other one called? There's like a Act 3 glove that makes it so that your weapon maneuvers have disadvantage on the saving throws against them, so that could also work, but I like the Legacy of the Masters more here. But in fact, I am going to show off a pair of gloves that I can't remember if I've shown off on the channel before as an earlier game option. These are the Cinder Snap gloves, which grant protection from missiles, which essentially is like Monk's feature, the deflect missiles without the ability to throw them back. This allows you to, once per short rest, cast this spell on yourself. It costs your concentration, but for 10 turns, ranged weapon attacks against you have disadvantage, and their damage is halved, so you can have a bit more tankiness against ranged attacks. You might find that this feels a bit too cool to just throw away, so you might want to keep these instead of just going for the flat damage boost, but again, I wanted my big heavy armor boy to have big heavy armor, and these are kind of like leathery gloves, but I quite like both, so feel free to pick up whatever you like. And for the boots, it really doesn't matter. Throw whatever you like in this slot. I decided to just show off something I've not shown off on the channel before. That is the Vital Conduit boots. When the wearer casts a spell that requires concentration, which we have a lot of, we gain 8 temporary hit points. So whenever we cast one of our many concentration spells that we're going to be using for buffing, we gain a little bit of extra tankiness to top it off, which is great. It felt on theme for this build, so I wanted to show it off, and it's an early game option as well, so you can pick this up straight away. On to the accessories, we have the Spell Savant Amulet, giving us an extra level 2 spell slot. An extra spell slot means an extra smite. We like those. Next up is the Killer's Sweetheart, again, pretty much my go-to Paladin ring. Whenever we kill a creature, our next attack roll will always be a critical hit. Once spent, this effect refreshes after a long rest. Basically what this means is it's kind of the, I mean, you guys already know this if you've watched my channel, but the description is wrong. This is not your next attack roll will be a critical hit. It is a reaction that you can bank that doesn't actually cost a reaction to spend to get a critical hit whenever you like, similar to Luck of the Far Realms. It is a really, really powerful feature that I absolutely love for Paladins, because it means a guaranteed max power Divine Smite, which is always good. And finally, since we're concentrating on so many different spells, let's grab the Strange Conduit Ring just to add an extra d4 of psychic damage while we concentrate. Throw whatever you like here, but I felt like this is just a nice overall damage boost, allowing us to, even without Great Weapon Master, still deal out a ton of damage. But again, you could go the Great Weapon Master route, drop the shield, and go for two-handing and just go absolutely insane. I mean, the damage on this build will skyrocket, but again, I kind of already did a build like that, so, you know. I wanted to do something a bit different this time, and I really like this one. I think the looks and everything really come together nicely, and the kind of theming, it all works. Probably one of my favorite deity builds, actually, which is nice to have. But yeah, that is the build. Overall, like I said, you're going to be getting a staunch defender, being able to protect allies and the innocents, while also dealing out massive damage in retribution. You also have a ton of utility spells, like I said. Just keep the whole party going and giving them a bit of extra damage, a bit of extra utility, all that great stuff. And, again, you're this big hulking badass, which I absolutely love. Yeah, so, I mean, you'll be seeing the combat footage playing now. It's a very short combat footage, or at least it kind of was, and then it kind of got into a bit of just a slugging fest at the end when I kind of ran out of spell slots, and me and the Still Watcher were just kind of going at it. Again, I wasn't using a lot of the buffs that I could have been using here, such as the Saluna Spear of Night, as well as the fact that the Steel Watcher was immune to psychic damage, so really the damage output of this build is a lot higher. Steel Watchers are just built different. But yeah, I really enjoyed coming up with this build. I think it was a ton of fun. Again, thank you to the people in the Discord, especially Kirk, who helped me get this figured out over on the live stream where we usually build the deity builds. And yeah, speaking of live streams, I've got a mystery live stream going live tomorrow. I really hope you guys come up for that. It is BG3 related, but I don't want to spoil what the stream is because it kind of needs the surprise factor to work as effectively as it can, because otherwise I don't want to give you lot too much time to prepare. Yeah, it's definitely a stream that I've not done before, but it's still Baldur's Gate related, so I think you guys are really going to like it. Unfortunately, I am a bit down under the weather at the moment. I do have a bit of a cold, if you couldn't tell by the weird jump cuts throughout this video, as well as my voice starting to go. So I think I will leave the video here, but thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.